So our first question is, how does Jaxport play a role in Florida's international connection?
And Jacksonville Port Authority creates the physical infrastructure to allow international business to happen in Jacksonville, specifically international trade. So the Port Authority actually creates the port facilities, the docks, the terminals, the cranes, the warehouses, those kind of items, which allow physically trade to happen. That's really what we do.
Okay. And the next question is, which the slide already mentioned, what is the nature of business of Jaxport?
Yeah, again, the nature of our business is to create the facilities to allow international trade to transpire in Jacksonville.
Okay. Now, how big is the company?
And you can measure ports several different ways. And I mentioned that one of the key ways folks like to measure ports is by how many tons of cargo do you move through the port. Well, we move 8.5 million metric tons of cargo through the port. That puts us as probably a mid-size port in the United States. It's hard to measure by that unit of measurement because some ports handle 10 times less cargo than us and some handle 10 times more cargo. So there's this huge range. So other ways to measure it would be, how many containers do you move? We move almost 1 million containers a year, so we're the 13th largest container port in the United States. How many automobiles do you move? We move over 600,000 passenger vehicles a year. So we're the #1 port in the United States for exporting vehicles, #2 for importing and exporting combined. So there's different ways to measure. By most measures, we're a large port in the United States.
What value does Jaxport bring to Florida?
The primary value that Jaxport brings to Florida is the jobs that are created from our facilities. And I mentioned that there's 22,000 direct jobs that are related to our port, and there's a total of 65,000 jobs statewide that are linked to our facilities. So it's really our ability to be an economic engine and a job creator. That's really the value accrued to the community and to the state for having facilities here.
I'm going to veer off a little bit.
Sure.
What is the impact of politics in Florida's ports? So Miami, Jacksonville.
Sure.
Do you think, politics is a big part of why maybe we haven't seen much growth?
Well, we've seen a lot of growth. When I first got here, we had 18 shipping lines. Now we have 42. We used to handle probably 30-40% less cargo than we handle now. So we've had a lot of growth. I really think that the depth of our harbor is probably the most limiting factor for us right now in terms of growth. In terms of the political influence, one of the reasons, a big reason that the Jacksonville Port Authority was created was to try to divest the politics from the port. Because prior to the creation of the Port Authority here in 1963, the city of Jacksonville ran the public docks and terminals. They ran the port. But the port got mixed up with all the other stuff that goes on in city government, including some of the politics. But also things like funding, like do you pave a road or do you do something at the port? And so one of the reasons that the Port Authority was created as an independent agency was to try to remove all the political machinations, if you will, from running the port and say, here, create a Port Authority, get a board of directors of business people, and go run this like a business to go generate as much business and jobs as you can and not have it all kind of meshed up with the politics that go on in the city. And that's both been a good thing, mostly a good thing, but the port has to be careful that we're not so divested from what's going on politically in the city that we're missing out on opportunities to be a part of the community. So there's positives and negatives. I think it's mostly positive.
Thanks. What percent of trading is international?
Almost 100% of all of our trade here is international, with one big exception, and that is our biggest trading partner is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not a foreign country. Puerto Rico is a U.S. Commonwealth. And Puerto Rico accounts for somewhere around 25% of all of our business. So if you look at Puerto Rico as a domestic market, then the answer is 75% of our business is international. But from our standpoint, we tend to look at Puerto Rico and treat it like an international market because from our standpoint, it looks like an international market because the goods that come in the same way, they're loaded on a ship the same way, they sell 1,300 miles away the same way, people pay the same rates. There's nothing special about them on paper in terms of them being domestic or international. So we look at ourselves as being 100% international, but there's a big asterisk there because Puerto Rico is technically a U.S. Commonwealth.
What strategies or stories does Jaxport have when it comes to maintaining its international connections?
The most important part of maintaining international connections are relationships. And as you probably know, that doing business in the United States is different than doing business in a lot of overseas communities. In the United States, Americans tend to be very business-minded. People will call us and say, I'm flying in on an airplane at 10 o'clock, I want to meet with you at 12 o'clock, and I'm flying out at 4 o'clock. And in that time that I'm here, I just want to sit down, just show me the numbers, show me the data, show me, and I'll make a decision. But in a lot of overseas communities, they don't want to do business that way. They want to know, who are you, and I need to know you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So they would like to go to dinner with you. They want to maybe do a social event with you. They want to get to know you as an individual, as a person, and then when they're comfortable, now let's talk about doing business. And so we run into this all the time, and I found that that's true of a lot of people doing business in just about any part of the world. Certainly our big trading partners are in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's certainly true. They want to feel comfortable with you as a business partner. But that's also true of people we do business with in Asia, and to some degree Western Europe as well. That a lot of our business meetings don't happen like they would just with an American meeting. That we're going to sit down in a conference room and plop down and I've just met you, and 5 minutes later we're delving into the numbers. You usually do not do that with international businessmen and women. That typically we're going to spend some time to get to know them because they want to get to know you. And sometimes there's some ceremony that goes on with that. They might want to, like I said, they might want to have a dinner, they might want to do a toast, they might want you to come to a cultural event, and this is all part of the courtship that eventually will lead to a meeting to get into the numbers. And this idea of a relationship, that I want to get to know you and maintain that relationship. So I'm talking to you as an individual, not just to your company. So that once you establish that relationship, when 2 months later when we're talking again, I want to hear from you, not from just another representative from your company. It's a different way of doing business culturally than we do business in the United States.
And the last question is, how competitive is the environment in which Jaxport is involved in? Especially when we know, like, on the coast is like,
Yes.
From south to north, there's tons of ports,
It's very, very competitive. And Jacksonville primarily competes in the South Atlantic. So we compete with Savannah, Charleston, Brunswick, Georgia. Those are our big competitors. Maybe a little bit Mobile. Not so much with other Florida ports. Maybe a little bit Miami, but Miami's 365 miles away. It's a long way away. A lot of the cargo that's coming in there is actually consumed or used in that area. Most of our cargo doesn't end up in Jacksonville. It's actually distributed from Jacksonville. So we do compete very heavily with ports to the north of us and other states. And it's a very, very competitive environment. And we've actually done very well. And if we can get the deeper water, I think that we'll do even better. But it is a very competitive environment for the ships that come in and for the cargo that goes on board those ships. Those companies have choices. And we have to convince them that Jackson was the best choice. It's not an automatic.